Well, hurrah! It's day 5, and this is my second attempt to start the day's walking. Again, minimal wind, well, almost no wind, and the 5th of my daily circuits into Wellesbourne and back out again. Still aches and pains, but obviously it's getting better. When I get up in the morning, I'm not struggling as much. I can get into the shower okay, and that's it. But I was so up for it this morning that I actually got a heavier camera out and a tripod that I have. It's an older camera, an older tripod. I thought, you know what, I'll film with that today. I won't bring me stick, I won't need it, and I'll bring that instead. The thing is, it's very heavy, and I brought it out and I thought, well, I'll just carry this, I won't carry the stick, and I'll just walk around and I'll put it in the little pack I've got on my back when I've finished with it. The problem was, when I walked out here, by the time I'd walked out here and got to basically where I am now, I thought, no, this is too heavy and I need the stick. And the reason I need the stick here isn't, oh well, for your legs, you know, to keep your legs. No, it's for when the lower back starts to play up. So you've got something to stop, spread your legs out, and you can and lean on the, you see the old farmers do it, you lean on the stick, and that helps you ease your lower back, you know, takes a little bit of weight off the back and gives you a little bit of a rest. So the stick is more for my back than for my legs, although it is good for balance, especially in the countryside. You do need something if you're a certain age. And so that was it. So I started off, I got about as far as here, and then I had to turn around to go back and redo my idea or what I was going to record in today. Woo, turning around the camera. Today may or may not rain, it's hard to tell at the moment. I've got an hour or so, 2 hours walking, and that's it. 2 hours walking, and hopefully it'll hold off. Again, very you know, you'd be a very disappointed sailor if you hired a yacht and decided to go sailing around this part of the world. No wind at all. But that's it so far. Things getting a bit better. Bit sick in my stomach because of some rubbish I ate last night. I'm trying to keep this a low carb, low sugar diet, and I ate something that disagreed with me. But apart from that, fine. So now I'm going to go anti-clockwise today, the reverse of yesterday. Out on the back road, into the town, coffee, and a turn round again, and back down that road. That drive that way there is a little bit disheartening because you can see the distance you've got to do, and when you're not, you know, if you were a lot fitter it wouldn't bother you, but when you can see the long distances. One of the reasons, when I was at school and they used to have us all running cross country, the thing that I hated the most about it was the fact you'd be in a field like this and you'd be just jogging here, and our county runner, the guy who later ran for the county and actually got a scholarship to the United States, would be right over the other side along with about 5 or 6 other people, and you'd be running there and you think it's just so demoralizing. So later on, when I was a teenager, if I went for a jog, I'd jog in the towns. It's one of the things I used to do when I used to travel a lot, is go for a jog round the town when you get to a new place. Get yourself set up wherever you are, and then put on a pair of shorts and a t-shirt and go for a jog round the town. Yeah, just to work out where you are going to go later on. Out for now. As I walk out of the estate here today, I'm just going to do a little bit of the history that I discovered. It's quite an old estate apparently, going back, well, right back to the Middle Ages by all accounts, 1500s, things like that and before. Been a number of houses here, but this last one was built in the Victorian age by some family, and it was sold on to some wealthy fella who had 2 homes, one here, and his base was in the Isle of Wight. And when he returned to the Isle of Wight, apparently the place became a little bit run down, and then it was taken over by a number of people. And one of the people who some people may know about, and it's very, very sad, was in the early 60s when it was run down, at a time when a lot of these places in the country were run down because people didn't have the idea of turning them into wildlife parks or turning part of it into a hotel and things like this. They didn't have the economic structures hadn't been put in place to make these places as viable as they are now. We take it for granted. You've got a place like this nowadays, you'll find a way, an investment to turn it into, you know, something that will be a conference centre, weddings, you know, that sort of thing. Well, not at the moment, but you know. But Danny La Rue, who was a drag queen back in the 50s and 60s in Britain. In fact, the most famous drag queen in Britain at the time. This is back in the 50s and 60s, when you could be a drag queen and people would still believe that you weren't, well, light on your feet, shall we say. He obviously was, as it turned out later on, but he was one of the most popular entertainers in the country, and he made a lot of money out of it over the years. He was very, very, very successful, having, well, between here, Australia, I think he was very, very big in Australia. And he had amassed a fortune of about £1 million, which in the 1960s was a lot of money. And this place came up, and Danny decided to buy it and to use it as, I suppose, it was his pension, really, his home, and an investment for the future. And unfortunately for Danny La Rue, he teamed up with a couple of Canadian con men. That's my green stick, by the way. Walking City. He was teamed up with some Canadian con men, and they basically robbed him blind. I mean, I think one of them went to court, so it was proper fraud, theft, conning, and Danny lost basically his money. He lost his money and his investments, and as a result of that, he had to continue working long after he would have probably slowly retired. So he still kept working till quite late on. But he did. He was big on the pantomime scene over here, and yeah, he was a very, very well-known entertainer back in the day, when people will tell you that you'd be persecuted if you were a little bit light on your feet. But he didn't. He got paid a fortune for it, and he was a comedy. He was an old school drag queen. He would do the songs from taking things back to the war days. The older ladies loved him. He'd sing songs from the 40s for them. He'd also do his Shirley Bassey impressions and things like this. And then he would be the drag queen. I've seen somebody do this, a very, very good version of him. Well, not him, the same technique down in London, in a bar one Sunday afternoon. And a little stage, about 2 or 3 inches of raised stage in a bar. And he would do the, I'm a lady, you know, look at me. He called the dresses were all frocks. Then he would look at this, girls, and showed all the ladies. So he'd get the girls interested in the dresses and how much it cost and all this sort of thing. A bit like it's a The way Liberace used to do that spiel with the look at these diamonds, girls, look at this, look at that, look at the state of this. But he would do it about the clothes and that, and get the girls going, and then to keep the lads entertained, because you were there with your, you know, the boys, the husbands. So if you think of it, when he started off, probably in working men's clubs or wherever, he's an Irishman, I think, by the way. When he started off, you'd have to keep the husbands and the fathers amused. So it was a mixture of that, and then broady jokes and double entendres and things like that to keep the lads. And he didn't do much. He'd sing, but basically when he was talking, it was him telling jokes and keeping everybody entertained. He had a number of series on the BBC. He was a regular on the Royal Variety Performances, and he made a lot of money. And apparently, when he decided to make a good investment for his future and his pension, basically, there's the house over there, you can't quite see it with the trees. When he decided to invest his money in a beautiful bit of land, a beautiful house, and a good investment, he probably would have done really well if he had the right partners with him. It was a time when this sort of things were starting in the 60s. People were starting to do this. I mean, he probably would have turned it into a campsite or a holiday camp or something or other as well. But these sort of things were the economic viability of these big estates, apart from the farming. Because what tended to happen in these big estates was the farming was sort of hived off to one side. Because if you did have proper tenanted farms that were making money, you didn't want the whole thing dragged down with you. So these houses are a huge liability. And you take a lot of looking after, and if you, as they did here, if you stop looking after it, all of a sudden, I know this, I left the house empty for 6 months while I was away. When you get back, it costs you more. It costs you more to get rid of the damp, it costs you more to redo the roofs, it costs you more to do everything. It's a shame really, because he was a really nice character. I've never heard anything bad said about him. You know, he was what you've seen. He was let's be fair, let's be quite honest, although nobody spoke about it at the time, he was a gay bloke who was a drag queen. But and a very successful one, a very good drag queen and comedian. And he was very good at it. And he made a lot of money out of it between here and Australia. I don't know how well known he'd be in America. New Zealand and that. Big star. And a very, very sad story really. Because he was robbed of all the money he'd made, the fortune that he'd made was robbed off him. And that was over this place here, Walton Hall, which is now, I think, part of it is timeshare. Oh yeah, that was another thing. At one time before or just after Danny LaRue owned it, there was a timeshare scam run out of here, where they built. That again was back in the day, before people knew better. And a whole company, they ended up in jail, ran a timeshare scam out of here. And the irony of it is, there is still here today timeshares, different company, and it's run legitimately, and there's still part of this estate there that is timeshare. And then another part of it is a functioning hotel and spa. Well, it's not functioning at the moment. The only people in there are people at work who are working locally. But yeah, very sad, because Danny LaRue, no big scandals about him afterwards. It appears that what you saw was what you got. You know, young lad brought up in the 30s and 40s. went into drag, became a drag queen, comedian, very successful at it, top of the game. If he was around here now, he'd be doing shows in the States and things like that. He was that popular. He'd have been the kind of person you'd have see partying. If it was later on, it was the 1960s and 70s, but nowadays, if he was transferred to this day, he'd be in LA, he'd be offered contracts, he'd be doing shows, he'd be out partying with all the big stars, all the British stars for a start, your Elton Johns and all that. All of these people would be fawning over him because he was really, really big. He's one of these guys who you would walk up to in the bar and buy a beer. All right, Danny, if you've seen him in an Australian bar or a hotel or something. All right, Mr. Rowan, how are you doing? Like a drink? Yeah? And you'd know all his songs and everything. But you say, my mother is a huge, huge fan of yours. And actually what you meant was, yeah, you're a big star, mate. You're a big star. Good on you. You've done a great job, well done. Yeah, he was a nice bloke, by all accounts. Yep, so that's the story of Walton Hall in the 60s and 70s. An estate struggling to find a way of making itself profitable outside of the farming and the estate itself. Another thing is the village here. All the houses in the village are rented because this is the estate. I only know of another place like that that's still traditional. I think there are some places in Scotland, but they've created laws now to make it, people have to sell the properties freehold in order to free up land. But I think it's here, and there's a place called Southwark down on the south coast, place I worked at one time. And this, the village there is owned by the estate, which is Southwark House. And Southwark House is where D-Day was planned. If you go in there, I don't know if the MOD still own it. You go in, you find a huge, great big Georgian period house. Beautiful big place. Surrounded by offices and everything, but a beautiful big house. It's a golf course fishing. Massive big estate like this one here. Gonna pull over out the way of this guy. Two pubs, Red Lion and White Lion. And down there's one house, and it's called the White House. Is it the White House? Was it the White House? Yeah, I think it is. My memory playing tricks on me. Which is in the village. And the reason that it was called that house was because the door on the house was painted differently. All the other doors in that village, all the windows and everything, all painted the same, because it's the colour for the estate. They're all rented off the estate. There's some married quarters there, military married quarters. The rules don't seem to apply to them, but to the actual houses in the village. And the one house that has a different coloured door, I belong to a doctor, because I think they couldn't get a doctor for the village, and I think a doctor, obviously they have money, and they said they weren't wanting to go there and not have somewhere to live, and I think they sold that house to him, or it was rented in such a way that he could do whatever he wanted to the house as long as he was there as a doctor, something like that. But they wanted a doctor, and as a result they bent the rules for that guy. But everything else in the village is painted as sort of like was burgundy at one time. Lovely little place, well kept by the estate. The estate is massive. It's got a whole golf course on it. It's got a massive lake which they do fishing on. Yeah, all owned by one person. I think the guy who owns it, or it was a bloke at one time, it was a woman initially, who had the house and the lands, and somebody told me she's the estate, or she was the only person who owned more than one church. She owned 2 churches, or she was responsible for them, or owned 2 churches in different parts, one in that village there and one in another village, I think it was Ball Hunt or wherever it was. So apart from the Queen, she was the only person, Queen, Church of England, her, not Catholic, the Catholic Church obviously, who owned two churches. And we're talking proper churches here, we're not talking Methodist halls or something like the proper medieval churches. And when she was when the war was on, because this house was on the outskirts of Portsmouth, down the road, well, a good bit, about 60 miles I think it is from London, but just outside Portsmouth, she offered the house to the War Office, as it would be then, because there was bombing going on in the dockyard, and senior officers and stuff were down there, so they stayed in the house, and then that house became the planning centre for D-Day. If you go in there, the map of D-Day was reset after the initial battles and that, when they knew things were sorted. They put it back to as it was, I think on 6 o'clock in the morning or whenever the landing started. It's in the living room, the house. No great big James Bond sort of bunkers here. You know, that's what the Germans lost here. You can't fight wars from bunkers. What you need is a nice house with a nice view and as many cups of tea as you can get, and a pub. And the pub used to brew its own beer. They used to have their own brewery. So anyway, yeah. So this village here is the same. It's owned by the estate, and all the houses are rented out to the people. Yeah, Southwark is a place. If you're down there in Portsmouth, it's not part of the Portsmouth tourist area. You have to look for it, and depending on how security has changed, at one time you weren't allowed in there, because although she lent it for the duration of the war, the Ministry of Defence kept it, even though it was her house, her land, her estate. She didn't really get it back at the end of the war. But what she did do was she insisted that there were stables there, and she insisted that the stables were maintained, that the estate was maintained, and she had she had that much influence over it. The estate. The Royal Naval Equestrian Centre was set up down there because they had to keep the stables open, and they had to justify that, so they put the Royal Naval Equestrian Centre in there. And then when they were building a security fence, no building could be taller than the highest tree, and they had a 4 or 5 story building which was for the wrens, for the female sailors. And what she did, like I say, because it still was her place, she still owned the place, no building can be taller than the tallest tree. And when they put up security, wanted to put up fencing around it, because at one time you could literally just walk into it, like here. Even in the wartime, Eisenhower and all that would have been up in the house there in the White House in Southwark, but they were surrounded by troops, but there was no massive fencing, all this sort of thing. Well, we had 30, 40 miles and miles of ocean and the Royal Navy to protect you before you got there. But years later, when they wanted to put security fences up, and this was towards the end of the Cold War, she made them put up, I think it was about 30 yards in the middle of a field. So if you imagine out there, she made them put up about 30 yards worth of the fencing that they wanted to use. And the fencing had to be green. And then they had to leave it there for a while So it went through all the seasons to see how it affected the scene of the basically, is it going to look good against the backdrop? Is it going to spoil the view? And she made them. She said, that's what I want. And because it was her land, they did it. And so we had a massive estate with a fence about 30 yards long. And then they eventually, when they got the nod from her, they put up the whole fence. Very strange. And then the final part of the story of Southwark was this lady had a very, apparently, I don't know the girl's name, had a strange name, an old-fashioned name, we'll say. And she had family. And her will, the land was given to the family, I believe, by Henry VIII. All of the area between Portsmouth and Northampton, the Forest of Beer. Beer, it's not bear and it's not beer, as in drinking beer. It's a different kind of Forest of Beer. And she insisted that the estate go to the surviving male heir who had the name. So that meant that her close relatives who'd married and had lost the name, and I think she had a daughter, but obviously they must have had money, because some chap up in Yorkshire who was a surveyor of some sort, so not he wasn't living digging ditches in the ground, like, so he was obviously a man who could look after himself, but he was a surveyor. Had a knock on the door one day, or a phone call, and somebody said, "Are you Mr. blah blah blah?" And they said, "We'd like to speak to you, Mr. Thing, because we have information that might be to your advantage." And then he went in, and when they'd obviously made sure that he was the man that they were looking for, you have to, if you do this, there's a whole palaver to it to make sure that you're legally the person. It's not just a knock on the door, "Are you John Smith?" Because there could be somebody in Australia, you know, it could be somebody in another part of the world. So they did all their research, and they said, "Well, you are the closest relative with the original family name, with the traditional family name. You're male. You've just inherited God, I would have loved to have been there to see that. Nowadays, of course, it had been filmed and put on YouTube. Nowadays, it'll be filmed and put on YouTube. But you've just inherited, I think it was a village, an entire village, a huge estate, golf course, the whole 9 yards. The house, although you won't be able to live in it. You've basically inherited a huge chunk of Hampshire. You've got 2 churches. He also, I think she left him in the tens of millions in investments. Obviously a place like this has to be looked at. I imagine, being the kind of lady that she was, if she was that insistent on the name and the tradition and all that, she probably had golden handcuffs there about what can be done to the house if he accepts it. You know, he'd probably, if he wants it to take on, because it's a huge responsibility, you know, lots of money, lots of history, she probably put a set of golden handcuffs on there to make sure that the place wasn't simply broken up. But yeah, congratulations, my man. You came in here a reasonably wealthy man, proper upper middle class surveyor in Yorkshire, and you're leaving here the owner of a massive estate. I think he asked at one time, I was told, this is just stories, that he asked if there could be an apartment set in the house for him so they could go and stay. But this was before, you know, things eased off between the east and the west, and they basically, the security arrangements would have been a nightmare. So, but he was entirely came down and apparently seen the house and everything. God, it must have been just absolutely. Nowadays, it'd have been videoed. You know, if he was the kind of person who wouldn't mind the publicity. There's the village green again. There's the houses. But yeah, good God, that was a telephone call and a half, or a knock on the door and a half, wasn't it? You've just inherited a massive estate, one of great historical significance. Yeah. Well, I'm not into the history. You play golf? Yeah, it's got a golf course. Yeah, how big? A proper full size. Do you do any fishing? Yeah, it's got a lake. Oh yeah, a big one. They do course fishing there, competitions, things like that. Right, and it's got a stables, the Royal Naval Equestrian Centre there. It's got a when he left, God knows what they've done with it, because the amount of stuff they left, the sports facilities there that the Navy put in, incredible sports facilities, swimming pools, saunas, tracks, rugby pitches, football pitches, all of this sort of thing. You can imagine, all there, all on his land, all in his estate. Yeah. Now, admittedly, with the MOD running the place at the time, but the fact is, he still owned the estate and owned the land. Incredible. What a lucky man. Well, this place here is the same. All owned by the estate, all the houses are rented. Usually, I don't know about up here, but in Cornwall, you usually get a good deal if you do long-term, if you become a long-term tenant on some of these estates. You get nice long leases at reasonable prices. I know I've seen people who were tenants of the Duke of Cornwall's estate down there. That's the Prince of Wales, the future king, and I believe they had they used to be, in the past, they used to be reasonably happy with the situation. It's a ruthless with the tenants and that, because apart from anything else, the people who managed all this for him were aware that any bad publicity reflected badly on the prince. So he owns Dartmoor. So they also are PR. Put it this way, they're not throwing widows and orphans out on the streets. Not nowadays, they're not anyway. But apparently you get a good, because the estates think long term. They're not companies, well, they are companies, but they're not at the same centralised corporate mindset, squeezing as much out as they can. If the estate is run, it's run for 200 or 300 years. Like they say, planting a tree you'll never sit under. Your grandchildren will sit under. Or paying to create a view that you will never live to see. But yeah, apparently you can get good deals and good long tenancies. They want the security, the money coming into the estate, and in return, you know, that's not all. Hashtag not all, as they say nowadays. I imagine there's rogues around, but that's what I've been told by some of them. You can get long tenancies, and you can get reasonable rents for what you're getting. And usually what you're getting is somewhere really not well, it's a lifestyle. Right, so that's the story of Southwark, and this is Walton, which, like I say, This is a village attached to Walton Hall, and Walton Hall, an old estate going back to the 1500s, and before that I only did a quick glance at the history. The Danny LaRue thing was the thing I looked at because I know from my youth, you know, he was a sort of a, do you think he was sort of a British Liberace, be the sort of way of thinking of him. So I was quite interested in that. I knew that he'd lost a lot of money, he'd been ripped off. I hadn't realised, I suppose he didn't put, people knew he lost a lot of money, but I think he wasn't too, I think the embarrassment of being ripped off by, because chaps don't like to admit that they're made fools of, the embarrassment of having been ripped off by these two Canadian con men meant that a lot of us thought that he'd just been unlucky with his investments. Well, he was, but not in the way unlucky, he was robbed. Right, that's it for now. That's my walkie-talkie bit for the day. Out for now. So now getting back towards the end of the walk, coming up to the estate house. This is the driveway leading up to it. Good little walk. Legs are aching still, but a couple of places I managed to pick up the pace a little bit. Here, for example, I'm going to try and increase my pace as I get back towards the end. Put a little bit of extra vim into my step. A little bit of extra effort. Good day, managed to beat the rain. Still very quiet, very calm. Not a wisp of wind. Very strange. Last 3 days, 4 days. Yeah. That's glad I did today. It's towards the end now. I'm glad I felt very, again, like yesterday, looking for an excuse, something to do that I needed to do, which would take me away from here for the day. But in fact, the walk is the most important thing. I said that I was going to do this. I need to get the circulation in my legs going. I need to improve my fitness. I need to get back to a standard of fitness, well, which most people would call normal, and have to put the effort in. So I'm glad that I got going. Once you get past a certain stage, I won't say you feel the benefit, but once you get past a certain stage, you know that you're doing the right thing. Nice wooded hill there at the back of the estate, and over there between those trees there's a weir which I hadn't seen before, just right at that tree now, obviously backing up the lake, the pond, or the lake, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. Legs are aching, ankle is aching, but I think that's a weight problem thing. I have to get rid of that. But the actual physical walking is well, it's happening. That's the main thing. It's so demoralising. It's a psychological thing of getting yourself up and getting yourself going, setting a routine for yourself in the morning. I got up this morning, had my shower, plugged in all the electrics to make sure they were charged for the walk, so I wasn't getting frustrated. I did actually get frustrated on the way out after I did my walkie-talkie bit. I tried to listen to something on my other phone. I'm looking to have two phones, one personal one, which is a work phone, and try to listen to something on the podcast, but couldn't get a connection, and that frustrated me. And then I realised I was becoming angry because I couldn't do what I wanted to do. Yeah, I was becoming upset and frustrated because I couldn't do what I wanted to do. But what I wanted to do, what I needed to do, was to walk. And whether I could listen to a podcast or not, so I walked into the village without listening to it. I got frustrated, I put it in my pocket, I said, right, that's it, that's done. And I kept going, strolled in, went round to where the cafe is and got a coffee, and I had to sit down to rest my legs for a bit. It's basically roughly halfway round, and then up again, fresh legs, back to this, because this is a bit, well, it's just what you see. It's a driveway, grass on each side. There's nothing to look at, nothing to distract you really. It's a beautiful part of the world, obviously, but it's just a long plod along this drive. Tomorrow I'll be going out the other way, but done. It has been done. I've been truthful to myself, or faithful to myself. Yeah, okay, I couldn't do 2 walks a day. Come out here full of intentions of getting up at 6 in the morning, going for a walk, coming back and resting, doing paperwork and doing computer stuff, then going out in the early evening and doing it again. Just not happening. Just not fit enough. Legs couldn't put up with it. If I tried to do it, even if I was ludicrous enough to have tried to do it, I'd have ended up having to get a taxi home or a taxi back from the town or something. Absolute. Next day I would have been able to do nothing. As it was, I struggled. So you got to bear in mind you're going to have the aches and pains. There's a difference between having the aches and pains of progress and doing damage to yourself. Whew. And at the moment I think I'm just about right. I am feeling like I put effort in. I am feeling, I must admit, I'm sort of feeling I make progress. I'm convincing myself I've made progress. But there you go. Very sad that I've let myself get into this situation. Should have been out more active, should have kept more active, should have got a push bike, cycled more, should have spent more of my time off walking around the town, exploring and then going for a beer rather than sitting in a pub, walking to the pub and sitting in it. So the aches and pains I suffer from now are the meals I had when I didn't really need them. They're the beer I drank when I could have gone and done something else. super fast train, they'll try and drag you up to their standard. Here we go, this is it, this is what we want to do. And some of them, if they're young people, they won't realise how it's, you know, your body changes over time. If they're older, obviously they'll take it into account. And that's all fair and good. You get the motivation off these people, and if it suits you, that's fine. But some of the other people, some of us, we need to walk before we can run. We need to do the green stick routine before we can pick up the weights bar. Then we need to do the weights bar, and then we need to put some weights on it. We need to do the walking before we can do the jog. You see these things on the television, the I lost so much weight type things where they have them running up. No, they're lucky. You're just injuries. When you get to a certain age, the one thing you do not want is an injury. On the first walk, when I walked back, I nearly stepped in the dark. I nearly stepped off the edge of the road. Thought I twisted my ankle. That would be me now for, what, a year? Young boy, 20 or something, not a problem. At our age, when you get up to your late 50s and 60s, you need to look after your health. The bumps and the bangs, you need to walk back to fitness. Walk till you can jog till you can run till you feel like stopping. And that's it. You do your sit-ups, you do your press-ups, and that's how it goes. So, my metaphor, the modern train, the TGV, yeah, the youngsters, 20 years old, the bullet train in Japan, fast, powerful, sleek, yeah, great idea. But you know what I want to be? I want to be, and British should know this, I want to be the Flying Scotsman. I want to be the Mallard. Okay, I'm not going to be doing the speeds that these others are doing. And if push comes to shove, I could hopefully one day do the weight. But I'm not going to be doing it every day because I don't need to, because at my age, yeah, God invented taxis for people like us when tired, you know, when we get tired. That's why they have comfy chairs, and cushions are designed for people like us. So we need to think of ourselves more like a graceful steam train of old. Most of the modern steam trains that you'll see running have been recovered from the scrap heap, which is effectively what we're doing. They were covered in rust, they were worn out and battered, and generally they needed a lot of TLC. But they didn't take them, bring them down to the TGV engineering office in TGV place in France to stick them in front of their engineers. The same with the bullet train. They didn't take them out to Japan to do them. What they did was they started off slowly, and they said, right, first of all, we've got to get rid of all this rust. We have to slowly get rid of the rust. Then we get the movement back in. So the parts of it, the parts of this old jalopy, this old unit work, we get rid of the rust, we get the movement back, we increase that movement. The little bits that we need to work on, that need to be strengthened, we work on slowly. We get it. It won't look pretty. We're not going to paint it all up and polish it yet. But what we are going to do is we're going to slowly get it working. We're going to redo the engine, get the old ticker going, nice and steady. Once we can get it at a steady pace so that it can carry us any distance, that's an improvement on what we've done before. and then we just gradually improve. And then when we get back up to a certain standard, yeah, then we can improve it again. We'll put a little bit more. If you think of your body as the what do they call it? The steam, the boiler. Yeah, you can sort of, they won't put pressure on it. You put a little bit of pressure on it, you test it, you redo it, put a little bit of pressure on it, and then if you're lucky, and because of age, you may never be able to take it right back up to the pressure that it was when you were a youngster. The same with the steam train. Won't be able to do what it did in the 40s, the 30s and the 40s. But what it will do is you can build the pressure up till you feel comfortable with it, that you're doing, that it's got a good head of steam on it and it's safe. And then, if you want to, you go out and you buy your Lycra. Then you think, you know what? I want a better quality t-shirt. I want a better quality set of training shoes. That's putting the paint, the final touches. I want to look good now. Now that I'm fit, I want to look good. What do I need to do? I want to go on holiday and get a tan. I want to get my hair cut differently. I want to dress differently. I want to feel better. Yeah? And so when you're in your 60s and your 70s, yeah, you won't be like the TGVs and the bullet trains, but you will be a glorious to look at, steady, all chromed up, all polished, all painted steam train from a bygone age that people steam train there chuffing away, and I thought that's the way to think of it. I can never be that, but what I can be is I can be in my 70s and in my 80s with people looking at me and they think, well, he's looked after himself, and you can say, well, I will never be the new thing, but what I will be is I will be the polished Rolls Royce from the 1920s. I will be that steam train. So when I go jogging, people will be amazed that I can turn up, put my gear on, do the run, do the jog, put the exercise in, turn up at the end. They're all 10, 20 years younger than us, but we're still looking good and feeling fine. And then you can act as an example to your own children and grandchildren. Okay? Yeah. That's the way forward. Anyway, that's that finished for today. Out.